The topic today is men's hearts failing them for fear. I am John EverBlest, and this is kind of my story. In the context of the dreadful end-time events, I've always assumed that the Bible was talking about our actual pumping hearts. But when the Bible talks about our hearts, hasn't it always referred to our minds? And why wouldn't it also be the same in the troublous times ahead? Men's minds failing them for fear. Okay, I'm thinking it was both. It absolutely applied to my mind when I indulged in fear, but also resulted in my failing health and threatened my very life. Fear destroys both mind and body. This text is applicable to both mind and body. All right, here we go. The mind was given incredible power to assist in our health and healing. But if we allow fear to hijack that power, it will break our trust in God, destroy our health, and send us to an early grave. The biblical healing principles and techniques in this lecture enabled me to extricate myself from 1.5 years of debilitating fear, anxiety, and panic attacks, and the many, many symptoms it manifested. This story tells God's leading in teaching me how to wield the power of the mind in very practical ways. As it turns out, to stand in the coming end-time crises, the habit of indulging in fear must be overcome because our eternal destinies are at stake. We do not enter heaven in a state of fear. Luke 21:25 says, "And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth." Daniel 12:1 tells us, "There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation." Those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy or sell. That is going to severely tempt us to indulge in fear and distrust in God, distrust of God. Great Controversy, 1888 version, page 622 says, "It is often the case the trouble is greater in anticipation than in reality." But this is not true of the crisis before us. The most vivid presentation cannot reach the magnitude of the ordeal. That's kind of awful. How will we stand in this scenario if we haven't already learned to replace fear with faith? What would be the cost of delay in replacing fear with faith? Well, let's see. From the Great Controversy again, page 622, "Those who exercise but little faith now are in the greatest danger of falling under the power of satanic delusions and the decree to compel the conscience." And even if they endure the test, they will be plunged into deeper distress and anguish in the time of trouble because they have never made it a habit to trust in God. Yeah, it's got to be made a habit. The lessons of faith which they have neglected, they will be forced to learn under a terrible pressure of discouragement. That's the cost of delay to replace fear with faith. So what does the Bible tell us may be the cost of failure to replace fear with faith? Oh, you won't like this. Revelation 21:8 tells us that the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Seriously? fearful is grouped in with that bunch of people, murderers, whoremongers, etc., etc. If the fearful will not be allowed into heaven, then we must deal with fear now. This text is telling us that fear is a symptom of something bad that God will not allow into heaven. At minimum, it's lack of faith. It's distrusting God, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. It means that fear is not an uncontrollable reaction on our part. It's a choice. Which is good news in that we have divine help to overcome it. The work of the people of God is to prepare for the events of the future, which will soon come upon them with blinding force. Second Selected Messages, page 142. Apparently, a real part of that preparation is dealing with fear before it destroys us, and it will. The danger of indulging in fear is what I call my story here. The idea that living with fear is akin to prison is true. Yet a much more accurate description is that fear is a snare set by the enemy of our souls for the faithless who venture onto its forbidden ground. Fear preys upon the faithless. I indulged in this faithless fear for a year and a half without even understanding that that's what I was doing. Besides the obvious of fear causing heart failure, there are many other physical health dangers associated with fear. My own experience is a painful example of what can happen when fear is foolishly indulged. My story includes how God led me out of this. All started with a gallbladder surgery. I was almost 50 years of age when I had my gallbladder removed. It was a routine outpatient procedure, no complications at all. The nurses were amazed at my medical history, which showed no list of chronic degenerative disease. From their experience, no one reaches 50 without acquiring a list of illnesses and a bag full of pharmaceuticals. Nevertheless, the bad gallbladder told on me. My sins found me out, that I had not been living up to all the health principles I believed in. Mystery medical problems after surgery. After surgery, however, I soon started developing all sorts of medical problems. And that list kept growing for a year and a half. For a year and a half. Neither I nor my doctors knew why. All sorts of tests were done, 6 visits to the ER, and I just kept getting sicker. So, the following is the list of illnesses that developed over a year and a half. But keep in mind, as I will explain in more details later on, all these symptoms were caused by fear and anxiety. But I didn't realize it until a year and a half into it. It happened to me because I did not know that fear could affect the mind and body this way. That's why I'm telling you about it now. All right, here's the list. Organized by category. There were so many. Digestion. Nausea to at least 3 months. Diarrhea, many months. Chronic bloating. Chronic shaking, especially after eating fruit. Sinking feeling in energy and in my tummy upon attempting to eat. It's like energy just kind of shut down because I was eating. That was actually fear that was doing that. I was afraid of my food. I lost 20 pounds. I went from 148 to 128. Jeez. Several severe intestinal cramps upon eating a pastry. Yeah, I got to tell you that story. I was in the midst of this, and I was traveling from one place back home near Barron Springs, and there was this roadside attraction, little bakery there, and I said, oh, I've so long since I've had a treat. I just want something. I'm so careful about what I eat. But I went inside, and they had these pastries. Oh, so good. Don't even remember what kind it was. But I thought I'd risk it. I'd say, well, maybe I eat it now, and I'm almost home, another half an hour, and I'll just go take some charcoal or something. Well, fear has power. I ended up with severe intestinal cramps. Oh my God. We tried hot and cold and prayer, and just finally it ended, but that happened twice. It was because I was afraid that that food would hurt me, and it did. I was afraid of everything at that time because all these symptoms kept happening. Went into a tailspin. The vicious circle here is that the more fear I indulged about what I ate, the worse I got. Fatigue, chronic fatigue, and adrenal fatigue. Constant scary back pain caused by chronic stress. I didn't know what it was. When I did finally find out what it was, it just made me fearful all the more. The second most frightening of all my symptoms was that constant pain in my back. I was so scared I thought I was dying. One night, in the middle of this nightmare, Susan, my wife, and I were praying together, and I was desperate. But I finally surrendered to God unto death, unto death. I chose to trust him while weeping with the thought of dying and suffering. My wife and I prayed together earnestly. When I got up from my prayer, God had healed me from my adrenal pain. But all the other symptoms remained. God had more things to teach me. And just so you know, I did not feel like surrendering myself to God, especially not unto death. I felt only dread and sinfulness. No particular sense of peace either. God's gift to me was the healing of my adrenal pain, but I had more to learn before God would show me the way out. He does that to us too, because sometimes we are not ready to hear the truth. We'd like to deny that, but we really can't. Sleep. Always insomnia. Very difficult to sleep. And the worst of all was that I developed sleep apnea. See that mask that guy had to wear? I had to wear a face mask. I had to buy a CPAP machine. I went to a home lifestyle center program hoping they could fix all my symptoms. This is the story of the BiPAP. Instead, their program made me exponentially worse. You're asking how? How'd they do that? I was scared of everything. My health was spiraling out of control. My mind was dramatically weakening. I didn't take their supplements because I was afraid they would hurt me. They thought I took them, but I did not. I couldn't recall any inspired counsels that advised us to take these, so I didn't. I didn't do the coffee enemas because I was afraid that they would hurt me, and it seemed to be against the counsel of the Lord as well. But when they made dinner with vinegar against the counsels from Ellen White, that destroyed me. I ate it in real fear. Vinegar hurts me. It keeps me awake at night and gives me the jitters. Ellen White was sick for 2 weeks trying to overcome her addiction to vinegar. That was the night when the sleep apnea began, there at that lifestyle center. It was the most frightening and awful of all my symptoms. I mean, talk about panic attacks. As soon as I would doze off, I would experience a growing heat in my chest, happen very rapidly, like that, and I would wake up with a gasp, gasping for breath all night long. As soon as I dozed off, wake up every single time throughout the whole night. This happened over and over many nights at random for a year. Not every night, but at random. I had to buy a CPAP machine, which just intensified my fear and anxiety and panic, which when I tried to use it, so I didn't. The lesson in this, well, I'm getting all tight just thinking, trying to remember this stuff. It's painful and hard on me. The lesson in this, if we are conducting a health recovery program, especially for Adventists, We are dealing with frightened people, many of whom are made much worse by their fears. If we run a program that runs contrary to the counsels of the all-knowing living God, we may very well increase the fears and symptoms of our patients and risk their very lives and cause them to distrust us. The vinegar seemed like such a little thing, you're saying, right? Well, that was the straw that broke this camel's back. It added to the cumulative stress that made my life wretched for a year. The suffering and anxiety was constant and intense. Thus the adrenal thing. Hair. My hair was falling out from fear. My ears were ringing upon going to bed, and I was very sensitive to noise. The ringing started in my ears every night as I was just about to lie down to sleep. I was at the bedside, getting ready to turn over and sit down and lie down. That's when this loud ringing in my ears started. It was fear. I hated going to bed because of my dread of sleep apnea, and it was so lonely going to bed alone because I worked a different shift than my wife. My fear of it caused my ears to ring upon approaching the bed. My mouth, raspy voice, most of that year and a half. Dry mouth while sleeping, really dry. Heart, high heart rate upon leaving the house. I was scared to leave access to health, to a toilet, to a bathroom, to a phone. High heart rate upon trying to walk. High heart rate upon doing something wrong diet-wise. I did something wrong, my heart rate would go really fast. Anytime I backslid, and for no apparent reason. Apparently that's accumulated stress for no apparent reason. Tightness, tight throat, tight tummy, tight chest, almost constantly, especially with exercise. Breathing, I had an increased work of breathing. It was harder to breathe, and periods of what I perceived to be shortness of breath. All of this made my anxiety and panic worse. I was in a spiral headed towards debilitation and death from fear. Odd, uncomfortable, weird feelings and pain in legs upon exercising. Torso. I had this sickening feeling when lightly pressing on it anywhere on my torso. This sickening feeling immediately worsened with the slightest increase in stressors or when low on fuel or sleep. That should tell you something. Cold hands and feet, cold body temperature. The brain, I was irritable. Forgetfulness, forget about it. I didn't have any memory. It was awful. I had indecision. I turned my decisions over to my wife. All of my decisions over to my wife. Men's minds failing them for fear. Severe stress intolerance, panic attacks, and an almost constant state of anxiety for 1.5 years. Yet, I ate as best I could. I stayed close to God. I asked church members to pray for me. I asked to be anointed. I went to a lifestyle center for a week. I had 6 visits to the ER, multiple visits to my doctor, multiple kinds of expensive tests, and nothing worked. After reviewing my final test that came back negative, my doctor, convinced that it was all in my head, pronounced that since you hate respiratory therapy, you are making yourself sick so that you won't have to return to work. Then that doctor commanded me with a disapproving air of authority and said, "You need to go back to work." Well, how do you think a patient in my condition would respond to that? Wouldn't you fire him? I did. Although that doc was at least in the parking lot of the right ballpark, it had to do with the mind. Sometime later, Susan and I finally figured out how to deal with the sleep apnea. Whenever I awoke with the sleep apnea, gasping for breath, Susan would pray for me and start reading the Bible to me out loud. That always worked, and allowed me to sleep the rest of the night. Here's a question. Could sleep apnea be a sign of satanic harassment, or was it just fear? Was it both? Did I open a door? However, this last night, praying and reading did not work. It did not work, but it always worked. So, and it happened all night long until morning. We both took it as a sign from God that we were supposed to go to the ER. Turns out it actually was God's leading. And my time of enlightenment and deliverance was at hand. And it was so simple. This was the 7th and final visit to the ER. This time there was a new doctor on duty that had not seen me before because I had never visited the ER in the day shift. He was a down-to-earth sort of guy, just like this guy looks. For the first time ever, I brought a written list of all my symptoms, including waking up with a gasp. Nice concentrated summary, instead of doctors having to look at these charts and looking at all of these, and here it is. And that made the difference. He looked at the list and just calmly said, I think we'll try some Xanax. The reality of the true cause of my condition immediately began to dawn on me. I knew what Xanax was. It was an anti-anxiety med. Yet no other doctor, ER doctor, told me about the possibility of anxiety. Neither did my mainstream doctor. As it turns out, ER medical staff tend to resist that diagnosis and are required by law to treat patients' symptoms, even if the doc knows it's just anxiety or panic attack. I had seen this in action numerous times when I worked as a respiratory therapist in the ER. And now it applied to me. That was not without some significant embarrassment. By the way, patients tend to resist the diagnosis of it's all in your head as well. But this doctor, it insults them. And they get offended. And they report anyone who dares say otherwise. But this doctor just said, I think we'll try some Xanax. He didn't say it's all in your head. He didn't criticize me. He didn't command me to go back to work. It dawned on me. He let it dawn on me. And that's something to remember when we treat patients. After he gave me the one pill, the one tiny little pill, tiniest one I've ever seen, he told me that I would soon be nodding off to sleep in the ER. And when I felt the sensation of growing heat in my chest, which would always wake me up with a gasp, that I was then to just ignore it. That's what the doctor said. Just ignore it and not let it wake you up. Interesting. He said that the Xanax would enable that. And it did. It did. That one tiny little pill acted as a diagnostic procedure for me. I think I took a half pill when I got home. Ever after that, well, no, didn't have any more. Without the doctor ever saying it, it was dawning on me that all these symptoms were born out of fear and anxiety. This doctor told me that the growing warm feeling in my chest that wakes me up with the gas was actually, get this, adrenaline. And that my sleep apnea wasn't sleep apnea at all, but sleep panic attacks. I didn't even know that existed. Yeah, he was a divine appointment. If you're sick, you do know what's causing it, and you go to ER, you ask God for a divine appointment doctor that will give you the right answer in the right manner. Oh, by the way, both share panic attacks and sleep apnea, both share the same symptoms of waking up with a gasp. So my reaction to that, what do you think? That was my reaction. Thank God. There was finally an explanation and some hope. All those symptoms were caused by fear, every single one of them. Fear being the exception to quick healing after surgery. Fear that my food would hurt me after my gallbladder was gone. Fear of every slight ache or pain. Fear of getting sicker. Fear of dying. Fear is a type of expectation of harm. Unfortunately, the mind tends to give us what we expect, right? I mean, you've experienced that. It's very important. My history just begins to show the incredible danger of unrestrained fear. I had been indulging my fears instead of resisting them. Didn't know that they could be resisted. Didn't know we were supposed to. As soon as I found out all of this, I had a choice to make. And you probably know what those choices were. A Xanax addiction, treat the symptoms, live with the side effects, or treat the cause and get God's blessing. The doctor sent me home with a bottle of Xanax, but I had no intention of taking those pills. I already knew where to get real, lasting help because I knew it now applied to me. The chapter called Mind Cure in the book Ministry of Healing. This was the subject of the very first health class at the lifestyle center that I attended while trying to get better, but which caused me to get worse. It's kind of ironic. But I had immediately dismissed the subject as having no relevance to me whatsoever. I thought it was above that all. And some of you here may be doing the same thing. If you're human, you are susceptible to this. Maybe you guys just haven't been tested on this thing yet. But after this last visit to ER, I went home. I read the chapter, and it was like reading a prophecy, a retroactive prophecy of my own experience. The solutions were simple and laid out just for me. And this solution came with God's blessing. I read that disease is sometimes produced and is often greatly aggravated by the imagination. Yeah, me. Many are lifelong invalids who might be well if they only thought so. Me again. All of this is me. Many imagine that every slight exposure will cause illness and the evil effect is produced because it is expected. You know, when you read this, when you finally get back to this chapter in Ministry of Healing, read it like this. Instead of many imagine that, say, put in your name. John EverBlest imagines that every slight exposure will cause illness and the evil effect is produced in you, John, because you expect it, John. This is pivotal. This is life-changing information, and my experience proved it to be true. Many die from disease, the cause of which is wholly imaginable. We're not just treating the bodies with our medical missionary work, folks. That's only half of it. If we don't deal with this, we may never heal some patients. This is actually revolutionary, or could be if we implemented it. If it's just the basic 8, wow, we have handicapped ourselves. We have put an anchor around our necks. I'm convinced that if God hadn't intervened and I had not read Mind Cure, that I would be dead by now. Mental health is an integral part of present truth, part of health reform, and needs to be a part of our gospel medical missionary work. Fortunately, I found by experience that a healing effect can also be produced if it is expected. Did you know that? The mind has power for good or for evil. That idea saved my life. So, I started expecting to be well. I made effort to expect to be well, and that began to make a difference. Next, I read that if you are in constant fear that your food will hurt you, it most assuredly will. This was a very big issue for me. So, I stopped fretting over the ingredients of my food. I focused on their healthy qualities. I asked God's blessing on it and threw out all the conflicting worldly counsel that I had gathered and used only Ministry of Healing exclusively. Before that final visit to the ER, I had been purchasing different health books from worldly doctors, studied the counseling sheets from Agatha Thrash, and pored over the pages of the Natural Remedies Encyclopedia trying to find a cure. I had started focusing on what saith man, even good men. All of those man-made theories seemed to make sense, but so much of it conflicted with each other. Many seemed to focus one way or the other on stripping my diet of healthy options. Well, here's why you shouldn't eat cantaloupe. It's of the family of such and such, and we all know that's bad. Well, no. We're told to eat fruit. These are man's theories. And here's why you can't eat peaches. More of man's theories, and this is real. Here's why you shouldn't eat more than one kind of food in a meal. This is from a doctor. Had I heeded all those counsels, plus many, many more, I wouldn't have been allowed to eat anything. We need to get back to the counsels and the writings of Ellen G. White. So I chucked out all of man's medical theories and restricted my healing regimen to the written counsels of God alone. By the way, that Natural Remedies Encyclopedia, I talked with one of the co-authors of that, one of the writers, and she said, yeah, John, it's true. Some of the stuff that's in here is just man's theories. It's not by experience. It's not God's stuff, or something like that. Even Agatha Thrash's stuff, some of it was just man's theories, not her own experience, not based on Ellen White. So, Ellen White alone. And that helped. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe in his prophets, so shall ye prosper. All right, back to it. I then read, often invalids can resist disease simply by refusing to yield to ailments. Really? And settle down in a state of inactivity. Just say no. I have found this to be absolutely wonderfully effective and true. So, I added that to the list. When a fear symptom showed up, I immediately commanded no. And pay attention to this. Then I physically did something. I said no, and then exhaled, took a deep breath, and exhaled the symptom away, imagining relief as I did it. And it was 90% effective. It was amazing. I then discovered this principle. Number 4. One of the surest hindrances to the recovery of the sick is the centering of attention upon themselves. Many invalids feel that everyone should give them sympathy and help, when what they need is to have their attention turned away from themselves, to think of and care for others. Now that's a natural remedy. We need to include this and drop that basic 8, which has put an anchor around our necks, thinking that that's all there is. There's vastly more than those 8. Those are just the foundation. Anyway, this has led me to realize that the more I dwelt on my illness, the sicker and more self-centered I became. Many sick people are like that. Most of us, I believe. So I would imagine what being well felt like, especially as I was painfully exercising. And that worked well as well. So to that end, I helped my neighbor out with a few projects, and that proved beneficial. I had my own wood shop projects that helped me divert my mind from my fear. At the time, I was building museum-quality reproductions of Dr. Kellogg's incandescent electric light bath cabinets. Made 2 of them, sold them to lifestyle centers. That kept my mind busy, fortunately. But potluck at church was my biggest and most reliable, complete reprieve from fear and suffering. It was the social factor. Got my mind off of that and just enjoyed social aspect. The interesting counterpoint to that is that Sabbath school and church was when I felt the worst. Out of the whole week, consistently, I felt the worst at church. Why do you think that was? You thinking that was the spirit of dark demons? No, I don't think so. I'll tell you why it was the worst. God used it to teach me that the more I dwelt on my sinfulness, the more sinful I became. The reason why it was the most bad for me, I felt the worst, is because I felt trapped by expectations. You come into church, people expect you to stay there quietly and not move until it's all done, the very last minute. Then you can move, but then you got to be ushered out. I felt pressure. It was too much. It was too much. I felt trapped, which intensified my feelings of panic. I sat in the back row for that whole year and a half. People were thinking I wasn't paying attention or I didn't want to be there. No, I needed a quick escape. It was amazing how simple that change of emphasis was. The more I dwelt on my sinfulness, the more sinful I became. I had no symptoms during potluck. Let me back up there. It was amazing how simple that change of emphasis was, but it made all the difference in my healing. That ministry of healing pointed out the power of the will. The power of the will is not valued as it should be, we are told. Let the will be kept awake and rightly directed, and it will impart energy to the whole being. Really? And will be a wonderful aid in the maintenance of health. Why aren't we teaching that? It is a power also in dealing with disease. Well, we have left that power unused. Exercised in the right direction, it would control the imagination and be a potent means of resisting and overcoming disease of both mind and body. True, I'm that example. There are thousands who can recover health if they will. They should make up their minds to be well. Fabulous, revolutionary truth. So, I determined to be well, and I became well. I would often say out loud when feeling yucky, I choose to be well. Yeah, it worked. Finally, I read, it will cost a determined effort to change the current of the thoughts, but the change can be made, and it is an uphill battle. So, I spent the time and effort needed, and it worked. It was fabulous. So a brand new thought started showing up a few years ago, and I tested it. Obsessive-compulsive disorder. Recently, it occurred to me that perhaps these mind cure principles could be applied to my lifelong obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. My OCD was merciless, tenacious, ridiculous, enslaving, and offensive, nervous tics of every sort. So, I applied the principles, and it worked on OCD too. And it didn't take much time at all. I mean, hardly any. And it certainly did not require pharmaceuticals. Apparently, I had the ability to end them all along. My OCD as a child was brought on by constant fear and anxiety caused by the severe abuse I experienced growing up at home by my parents, as did my other siblings, and theirs was worse. Apparently, OCD wasn't even a real disease. It wasn't provable. It's part of the deceptions of pharmakeia that has deceived all nations. The psychiatric industry has promoted the unprovable lies that there are a lack of needful chemicals in the vast majority of human brains that are the cause of countless made-up mind diseases. They would have us believe that we all require their poisons to replace those missing chemicals. What a great way to excuse sin and make tons of money at the same time. Just call bad behavior a disease. We got an app for that. We have a drug for that. My so-called OCD hold on a second. My so-called OCD was just a bad habit. It's just a bad habit, born of unrestrained anxiousness. That's it. That's all. I allowed it to become an unchecked indulgence in fear and anxiety, which became habitual. And it felt like it took on a life of its own. It manifested itself as nervous tics. But following God's counsel in Mind Cure, I overcame my bad habit of indulging anxiety without a single psych drug, except that 1.5 pills at first. I overcame fear and anxiety and panic attacks without drugs. I overcame many health conditions without a single pharmaceutical. Well, other than that, again, that first day in ER. It was so simple, folks. Embarrassingly so. I simply had to, this is it. I simply had to immediately and consistently reject the symptom when it showed up, the emotion or the impulse. Do not fall for the deceptions of pharmakeia, that we have chemical imbalances in our brain that require Babylon's poisons to make us whole. Every time I soundly rejected the clamoring of that anxious habit, the impulse significantly weakened. No, I choose to be well. The symptoms just kind of drained away. I felt it weaken. And I did it again, and it weakened some more. So where in the Bible does God command us to drug up? Someone point that out for me, huh? No, no, no. God's command to us is fear not. It's so simple. There are vast industries that prey on the fearful. God's solution, fear not. Bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. The Bible commands us over and over again to fear not. And that command carries with it creative power to obey. He says, fear not. You adopt it to yourself and you have the power. We just have to choose to obey and accept by faith that creative power. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5 says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, pharmakeia, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear. God didn't do that, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. If God doesn't give us the spirit of fear, where does it come from? Well, we could generate it ourselves, or Satan has certain rights. He is allowed, apparently, to pop thoughts, even feelings, into our heads. But it's up to us what we do with those thoughts and feelings. We don't have to accept a harmful thought or feeling, no matter where it comes from. We have been given the power of choice, and we can choose to instantly reject negative, harmful thoughts and feelings. Instantly. Just because a bird lands in your hair doesn't mean you have to let it build a nest up there. Goodness. Resisting negative emotions can become a habit by repetition. We can instantly reject mind and body destroying fear and bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. It brings new meaning to resist the devil and he shall flee from you. What if we don't resist the devil, though? What if we don't resist fear? Well, we have been told to guard well the avenues of the soul, right? Could unrestrained fear be one of those avenues to the soul? Oh, I do believe that now. Absolutely. Does unrestrained fear give the enemy of our souls a degree of access to our minds? We know that unrestrained fear leads to anxiety, which leads to panic attacks. We know that unrestrained tics lead to OCD, which leads to Tourette's syndrome. It comes from somewhere. And Tourette's syndrome has the fingerprints of demonic possession, oppression, or harassment all over it. I believe that my unrestrained indulgence in fear did indeed open a door to some kind of satanic oppression or harassment, whatever. There were 4 times during that year and a half, there were 4 times where the symptoms were so severe and out of character with the norm that I had to ask God to contend with them that contend with me. That's a Bible promise. All 4 times, the symptoms immediately dropped. And that's not normal either. So yeah, there was a component there. He was trying to slip it in there, thinking that I would think that it's just my fear. What we know for certain is that God has not given us a spirit of fear. We shouldn't have it. We have to reject it, including anxiety, including panic attacks. Philippians 4:4 and 8. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving let your requests be known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Now, most people stop right there, as I did, as though that's all Paul had to say on the matter of anxiety. Nope. But the very next paragraph, Paul tells us that it takes more than just prayer. He tells us exactly how to eliminate anxiety in his next paragraph. Some of you already know this. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. This is a prescription for mental health. It's the prescription to bring every thought into captivity. The brain does not have an off switch. You can't just take your mind off of something like fear and anxiety. You have to replace the negative thoughts with something good. And it's made all the difference for me. I think if everyone would do this on a regular basis, we'd have world peace. Now, here are a few more of the quotes that enabled me to overcome my long reign of terror and fear and its devastating effect on my health. We're almost done here. Sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of the diseases which men suffer have their foundation here in the mind. 9/10, 90%. Testimonies for the Church, number 5, page 443. Ministry of Healing, page 241. The relation that exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. Interesting. The condition of the mind affects the health to a far greater degree than many realize. Many of the diseases from which men suffer are the result of mental depression, grief, anxiety, discontent. Discontent. Whoa, that's us. Remorse, guilt, distrust, even distrust. All tend to break down the life forces and to invite decay and death. We have to incorporate this thought into our healing regime. We cannot ignore the mind anymore. But courage, hope, faith, sympathy, love promote health and prolong life. A contented mind, a cheerful spirit, is health to the body and strength to the soul. A merry, joyful heart doeth good like a medicine. And it was Ellen White who put that joyful in the parentheses there. Nothing tends more to promote health of body and of soul than does a spirit of gratitude. Did you hear that? Seriously, nothing? Not even proper vegan diet, not even sunlight? Folks, we need to believe his prophets and we shall prosper. Don't dismiss this revelation from God. We would be criminally negligent if we didn't actively include this to the basic 8 principles. We are not to be contented with just the basic 8. New Start is not a complete healing package. Let me read this statement here too. Nothing tends more to promote health of body and of soul than does a spirit of gratitude and praise. Wow. Now here's an interesting thought. It is a positive duty. Really? A positive duty to resist melancholy, discontented thoughts and feelings as much as a duty as it is to pray. These depressing emotions are a great injury to them health-wise. For by hindering the process of digestion, they interfere with nutrition. Digestion? No wonder my food wasn't giving me any energy. No wonder I was nauseated for months. No wonder I had months of diarrhea. No wonder I lost 20 pounds. And by the way, discontented and negative thoughts, anger, this is all part of an unforgiving spirit as well. We must forgive all those who have done us wrong, or we will continue to be sick. We will not heal. I've heard stories. You've heard stories. While grief and anxiety cannot remedy a single evil, they can do great harm. But cheerfulness and hope, while they brighten the pathway of others, are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. The Bible is filled with quotes admonishing us to be courageous and fear not. And here they come. Fear not. I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. Be strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Deuteronomy 31:6. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid. Neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee. Isaiah 41:10 says, Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. For he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. Psalm 91:11. Be not afraid, only believe. Mark 5:36. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:7. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled. Let it not be troubled. Neither let it be afraid. So we have choice. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name. Thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. For I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee. Jeremiah 31:3. Ye that have been born by me from your birth, that have been carried by me from your earliest breath, even to your old age, I am the same. Even to your gray hairs, I will carry you. I have done it, and I will still bear you. I will carry, and I will deliver you. Isaiah 46:3 and 4. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Matthew 28:20. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne. Revelation 3:21. That's the end of that. I'm going to pray here. Father God, your mercies are abiding forever, it seems. You have given us so much counsel, so much love you have presented to us, so many answers. We ask that you lead us now back to your ways, to your old paths, that you take away our fears, give us power to resist, Lord God. We thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen.